Sometimes protecting your peace feels less like strength and more like sadness, because sometimes peace means accepting that you cannot keep explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Hey there, and welcome to Momma Drama Trauma. I'm your host, Jenny Kimmel, and today we're talking about something that sounds simple on the surface but feels anything but simple when you're actually living it. We're talking about protecting your peace. Sometimes protecting your peace doesn't feel strong at all. Sometimes it just feels sad, because sometimes it means realizing you can't keep explaining yourself to people who just don't see you. Not in the just ignore everything way, but in the real, lived, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes lonely way. Because protecting your peace isn't always calm and pretty. Sometimes it feels like choosing silence when you want to explain yourself. Sometimes it feels like stepping back from people you care about because the dynamic no longer feels healthy. Sometimes it feels like realizing that the chaos you used to survive in has wired your nervous system to expect noise, tension, and emotional intensity, even when what you actually want now is quiet. And I think that's the part people don't talk about enough. There comes a point in healing where you don't crave the drama anymore. You don't crave the emotional roller coaster. You don't crave the constant processing and overanalyzing and explaining and defending who you are. You just want peace. You want simplicity. You want your nervous system to finally exhale. You want your life to feel lighter, even if it's quieter. For me, protecting my peace right now looks like stepping back from emotional chaos that used to feel familiar. And I'm realizing that just because something feels familiar doesn't mean it's healthy. Sometimes what we're used to is what hurt us. Sometimes what we survived becomes what our body expects, even when our heart is craving something different. There's a version of my life that I daydream about sometimes, and it's not dramatic, it's not flashy, it's not complicated. It's sitting on a front porch swing, sipping sweet tea, watching the world go by. It's watching a beautiful sunset or a quiet sunrise. It's a simple life, an easy life, a normal life, one that doesn't constantly feel like emotional work. And the truth is, choosing that kind of peace means you have to start letting go of the things that pull you back into chaos, even when those things used to feel normal, even when they involve people you care about, even when walking away feels uncomfortable. So today, this episode is about what it really means to protect your peace when life keeps trying to pull you back into emotional noise. We're going to talk about why chaos can feel familiar, why peace can feel a little uncomfortable at first, and how choosing a quieter life isn't giving up on connection, it's choosing a healthier one. When chaos feels familiar, there is something really strange about healing that no one prepares you for. When you've lived in emotional chaos for a long time, peace can feel unsettling at first. Not because peace is bad, but because your nervous system got used to something else. When you've been living in stress and tension for a long time, your body just gets used to it. It gets used to always being on edge, always looking for what might go wrong, always kind of bracing for the next thing. So when life starts to quiet down, your body doesn't always recognize that as safe right away. Sometimes calm feels a little uncomfortable. Sometimes it feels unfamiliar. Sometimes it even feels like something's off, like you're waiting for something to happen. So you might notice yourself feeling restless in quiet seasons. You might notice yourself feeling uncomfortable when things are finally calm. You might even notice yourself unconsciously pulling chaos back in because part of you doesn't know what to do without it. That doesn't mean you want chaos. It means your nervous system learned how to survive in it. For a long time, my life felt like emotional noise. Always processing something, always reacting to something, always navigating tension, expectations, misunderstandings, or conflict. And when that started to shift, when I started craving peace instead of intensity, it felt almost unfamiliar to me. I realized that I don't actually require much to feel content. I'm a pretty simple person. I don't need a lot. I don't crave constant excitement. What I crave now is steadiness, quiet, normalcy, the absence of drama, the absence of emotional chaos. But there's a grief that comes with that too, because sometimes you have to acknowledge that what felt familiar to you was not actually healthy. Sometimes you have to grieve the version of yourself that learned to survive in chaos. Sometimes you have to admit that you became strong in environments that never should have required that level of strength. And choosing peace doesn't mean you're weak now. It means you're tired of carrying what never should have been yours to carry. Protecting your peace starts with recognizing when something feels familiar but no longer feels safe. It starts with noticing when your body tightens around certain dynamics. It starts with paying attention to what drains you emotionally versus what steadies you. Peace doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes peace arrives quietly. Sometimes peace arrives in the absence of something. Sometimes peace arrives when you stop engaging in the patterns that kept you stuck. And at first, that quiet can feel lonely. It can feel boring. It can feel like something is missing. But what's missing is the chaos your nervous system learned to live in. And what you're creating space for is something gentler, something steadier, something that doesn't require you to constantly be on guard. Protecting your peace isn't about building walls. It's about finally giving your nervous system permission to rest. Outside opinions and the emotional noise we carry. One of the biggest places I notice my peace getting disrupted lately is by outside opinions. And that's frustrating to admit because part of me wants to say, I don't care what people think. Part of me wants to believe I've outgrown that. Part of me wants to believe I'm so grounded in who I am that outside noise just rolls off me. But the truth is, I'm still human. There are days when someone's comment lingers in my mind longer than it should. There are days when someone's perception of me feels heavier than I want it to feel. There are days when I find myself replaying conversations or words that didn't even come from people who are deeply rooted in my life. And when I sit with that, honestly, I realize something. It's not that I actually value those opinions. It's that I spent a long time being shaped by environments where how I was perceived mattered for survival. When you've been in relationships where you felt like you had to explain yourself all the time, or defend yourself, or just try really hard to be understood, you kind of get used to that. You get used to paying attention to how people are reacting. You get used to wondering if you said something wrong. You get used to bracing for being misunderstood. So even when you know now, like logically, I don't need everyone to understand me, your body still reacts like you do sometimes. So protecting your peace here isn't about suddenly becoming unbothered. It's about slowly helping your body understand that it's okay to relax, that not everything around you is something you have to brace for. One of the biggest shifts I'm making is learning to separate what is actually mine to carry from what belongs to other people. Someone's disappointment in me is not automatically mine to fix. Someone's misunderstanding of my intentions is not automatically mine to correct. Someone's projection of their own hurt, insecurity, or narrative onto me is not mine to internalize. That doesn't mean I never reflect. That doesn't mean I never take accountability. It means I'm learning the difference between healthy self-reflection and self-abandonment. For a long time, I confused being a good person with being endlessly explainable. I thought if someone misunderstood me, it meant I needed to try harder to be understood. I thought if someone felt hurt by my boundaries, it meant my boundaries were wrong. I thought if someone questioned my character, it meant I needed to prove my character. And that is exhausting. It's exhausting to feel like your peace depends on whether other people interpret you correctly. It's exhausting to feel like you're constantly on trial for who you are. It's exhausting to carry emotional noise that doesn't actually belong to you. Protecting your peace means allowing people to have their own thoughts without letting those thoughts run your inner world. This is one of the hardest parts of healing because we don't like being misunderstood. We don't like knowing that someone out there may have a version of us in their head that doesn't match who we know ourselves to be. We don't like the idea that someone could walk away thinking we were cold, distant, selfish, or uncaring when we know the truth is more complicated than that. But here's the quiet truth I'm learning. You can be deeply kind and still be misunderstood. You can have good intentions and still be misread. You can show up with love and still be painted as the villain in someone else's story. And that doesn't mean you failed. It just means you're no longer willing to change who you are to fit into someone else's version of you. Protecting your peace in this area looks like pausing before you react. It looks like asking yourself, is this actually mine to carry? It looks like noticing when your body tightens around someone else's opinion and choosing to soften instead of spiral. Sometimes protecting your peace means not responding at all. Sometimes it means letting a comment go unanswered. Sometimes it means choosing not to clarify something that you know. Deep down, the other person isn't actually open to understanding anyway. Not every misunderstanding is meant to be resolved. Not every perception is meant to be corrected. Not every opinion deserves your emotional energy. This doesn't make you cold. It just means you're being more careful about what you give your energy to. You are allowed to decide whose voices get access to your nervous system. You are allowed to choose which opinions shape your inner world. You are allowed to let some thoughts about you exist outside of you without bringing them inside. And maybe that's what protecting your peace looks like in this season. Not hardening your heart, not shutting people out, but learning to keep your inner world softer by not letting every external voice echo inside of it. When engagement costs more than it's worth. One of the hardest lessons I'm learning in this season is that not every moment of connection is actually supportive. There are times when you reach out because you're overwhelmed, because you're tired, because you're carrying more than you can hold by yourself in that moment. And you think, if I just say this out loud to someone who knows my life, maybe I'll feel a little less alone. That desire makes sense. It's human. It comes from wanting to be seen. It comes from wanting relief. It comes from wanting someone to meet you in the middle of your exhaustion and say, I get it. You're not crazy for feeling this way. But not everyone you reach out to is actually a safe place to land emotionally. And that's a painful realization. There are people in our lives who are connected to us by history, by shared experiences, by family, and just because they've been around for a long time. And sometimes we mistake what we're used to for something that actually feels safe. We assume that because someone has been in our life for a long time, they know how to hold our emotions with care. We assume that because someone knows the context of our life, they will meet us with understanding. But emotional safety isn't about how long someone has known you. It's about how they respond when you're vulnerable. There's a difference between being heard and being met. There's a difference between being listened to and being supported. There's a difference between being acknowledged and being emotionally held. Sometimes you leave a conversation feeling lighter, and sometimes you leave a conversation feeling heavier than when you entered it. That's been one of my clearest signals lately. I've had moments where I reached out because I was struggling, because something felt like too much for me to carry alone in that moment. And instead of feeling supported, I walked away feeling unseen. The response didn't match the need. The emotional tone didn't meet me where I was. And afterward, I sat with that familiar, sinking feeling of, I shouldn't have gone there. Not because I shouldn't have needs, not because I shouldn't express them, but because I chose the wrong place to bring them. That's a really tender realization because it forces you to grieve something. It forces you to grieve the version of that relationship you hoped existed. It forces you to grieve the idea that certain people could be a source of emotional support when they actually can't be. And that grief doesn't mean those people are bad. It doesn't mean they're intentionally harmful. It means they may not have the capacity to meet you in the way you need. Part of protecting your peace is learning who is safe to bring your vulnerability to. And part of protecting your peace is learning who isn't. This doesn't come from judgment. It comes from awareness, because every time you bring your tender emotions to someone who can't hold them, it costs you something. It costs you energy. It costs you clarity. It costs you a little bit of your peace. You walk away replaying the conversation. You wonder if you said too much. You question if you were wrong to reach out. You feel a subtle sense of regret, not because you spoke, but because you spoke into a space that wasn't safe for your words to land. That's emotional labor you don't have to keep doing. Protecting your peace here doesn't mean you stop being honest about how you feel. It means you become more intentional about where you place your honesty. It means you start asking yourself, is this person emotionally available for what I'm about to share? It means you start noticing patterns in how certain people respond to your vulnerability. It means you learn to differentiate between someone who hears you and someone who actually holds space for you. And learning that, that's a form of self-respect. It's you saying, my emotions are not disposable. It's you saying, my vulnerability deserves care. It's you saying, I don't need to bleed in rooms that can't hold my healing. There's also another layer to this. Sometimes engagement costs more than it's worth, not because the person responds poorly, but because the dynamic itself is no longer aligned with who you're becoming. You might notice that certain conversations pull you back into old emotional patterns, old roles, old versions of yourself that you've outgrown, and after those interactions, you feel like you've taken 10 steps backward emotionally, you feel dysregulated, you feel drained, you feel like your nervous system is once again bracing for impact instead of resting in safety. That's information. Your body is wise. It tells you when something is not nourishing you anymore. Protecting your peace means listening to that wisdom instead of overriding it out of habit, guilt, or obligation. You don't have to stop caring about people to stop bringing your emotional needs to spaces that can't meet them. You don't have to burn bridges to quietly change where you place your vulnerability. You don't have to announce your boundaries for them to exist. Sometimes protecting your peace looks like quietly choosing a different kind of support. It looks like journaling instead of texting someone who can't hold your emotions well. It looks like taking a deep breath instead of opening a door that you know deep down will leave you feeling emptier on the other side. And learning this doesn't mean you're becoming closed off. It just means you're being more careful with your heart, not taking the bait. There's a certain kind of growth that doesn't look dramatic on the outside, but it feels monumental on the inside. It's the moment you realize you don't have to engage with everything that's handed to you emotionally. For a long time, I felt like I had to respond to everything. Every comment, every accusation, every misunderstanding, every emotional nudge that made me feel like I needed to explain myself. It was almost automatic. If someone was upset, I felt responsible to fix it. If someone misunderstood me, I felt responsible to clarify. If someone questioned my character, I felt responsible to defend who I am. And that pattern didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of learning that emotional peace was something I had to earn. That if I could just say the right thing, explain myself clearly enough, show my heart thoroughly enough, then maybe I could avoid conflict, avoid being misjudged, avoid being the bad guy in someone else's story. But here's the hard truth I'm learning. Not every emotional invitation is an invitation worth accepting. Sometimes people come at you with guilt, sometimes with blame, sometimes with subtle jabs that are meant to pull you into an emotional reaction, sometimes with narratives about who you are that don't align with who you know yourself to be. And when you engage with that, you don't just engage with their words. You engage with the emotional weight of it. You bring it into your body. You carry it with you longer than the conversation lasts. Not taking the bait doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care about your peace more than you care about winning a moment of emotional back and forth. There's something really powerful about being able to say internally, that's not mine to carry. Someone else's guilt does not automatically belong to you. Someone else's projection does not define your character. Someone else's interpretation of your boundaries does not make your boundaries wrong. There are moments now where I can feel the pull to explain myself, to justify why I made a certain choice, to defend my intentions, to prove that I'm a good person with a good heart. And then I pause, I ask myself, is this person actually open to understanding me, or are they already committed to their version of me? Because explaining yourself to someone who has already decided who you are is an exhausting, one-sided performance. It doesn't bring resolution. It brings more emotional labor. It keeps you stuck in a dynamic where you're constantly trying to be seen by someone who isn't really looking at you. Not taking the bait sometimes means letting someone be wrong about you, and that's uncomfortable. It stings. It can feel deeply unfair, but your peace cannot be built on whether other people interpret you correctly. You can know who you are, you can know your intentions, you can know your heart, and still be misunderstood. That doesn't invalidate your truth. Protecting your peace here looks like learning to sit with that discomfort without trying to fix it immediately. It looks like allowing yourself to be okay with not being fully understood by everyone. It looks like trusting your own character enough that you don't need to constantly defend it. There's a quiet confidence that comes with this kind of boundary, not the loud kind that announces itself, but the grounded kind that knows when to step back. Sometimes not taking the bait is choosing not to reply to a message that is clearly meant to provoke an emotional response. Sometimes it's choosing to end a conversation that's going in circles. Sometimes it's choosing silence over the urge to prove your point. And that silence is not passive, it's intentional. It's you saying, I'm no longer available for emotional tug of war. It's you saying, I don't need to participate in dynamics that leave me feeling small, defensive, or emotionally drained. This is what that looks like when you're actually living it. It's messy, it's uncomfortable, it doesn't always feel empowering in the moment. But afterward, when you notice that your body feels calmer, your breath feels steadier, and your mind isn't replaying the conversation over and over, you start to realize that not engaging was actually an act of self-respect. Protecting your peace doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop letting emotional chaos have unlimited access to you. And that shift, as quiet as it looks from the outside, is a form of healing that changes everything. When protecting your peace feels like being mean. One of the hardest parts of protecting your peace is not the boundary itself. It's what the boundary brings up inside of you afterward. Because even when you know you're choosing something healthier, there can still be grief. There can still be sadness. There can still be that quiet ache of knowing that someone you cared about may walk away with a version of you in their mind that doesn't match who you know yourself to be. I think that's the part people don't talk about enough. Protecting your peace doesn't always feel empowering in the moment. Sometimes it feels lonely. Sometimes it feels heavy. Sometimes it feels like loss. There's a grief that comes with realizing that certain relationships are no longer healthy for you, even if they once brought you comfort, laughter, or a sense of connection. There's a grief in accepting that you can love people and still need to step away from the dynamic you shared with them. There's a grief in knowing that choosing yourself may look like abandonment to someone else, even when it isn't. And when you care deeply about people, that hurts. It hurts to think that someone might believe you are cold when you're actually protecting yourself. It hurts to think that someone might believe you walked away because you didn't care, when the truth is you walked away because the relationship no longer felt safe for your nervous system. It hurts to think that someone might question your character when you know your heart, your intentions, and the care you brought into that connection. Being misunderstood is one of the most painful emotional experiences. We all want to be seen accurately. We all want our intentions to be recognized. We all want the people who matter to us to hold a fairer version of who we are. But protecting your peace means accepting that you cannot control the stories people tell themselves about you. And that's a deeply uncomfortable truth. There are moments when I catch myself replaying conversations in my head, wondering if I could have said something differently, wondering if I could have explained myself better, wondering if I could have softened something so it didn't land the way it did, wondering if I could have prevented the misunderstanding if I had just tried harder to make myself clear. That spiral is so familiar. It's the part of me that still wants to be understood by everyone. It's the part of me that still wants to be seen as kind, caring, and well-intentioned. It's the part of me that still struggles with letting go of how I'm perceived. But here's what I'm slowly learning. You can be kind and still be misunderstood. You can be gentle and still be painted as the villain in someone else's story. You can show up with with love and still be accused of things that don't align with who you are. And at some point, you have to decide whether you're willing to keep sacrificing your peace in order to manage other people's perceptions of you. Protecting your peace doesn't mean you stop being compassionate. It means you stop abandoning yourself to maintain someone else's comfort. There's a difference between being mean and having boundaries. There's a difference between being cold and just protecting your peace. There's a difference between giving up on someone and choosing not to participate in a dynamic that harms you. But when you're someone who leads with your heart, those distinctions can blur emotionally. You can feel like you're doing something wrong simply because you're doing something different. And that's where the sadness comes in. There's sadness in realizing that not everyone you cared about gets to come with you into the quieter, healthier version of your life. There's sadness in accepting that some connections were meant for a season, not for your future. There's sadness in letting go of relationships that once felt safe, even if they no longer are. Choosing peace doesn't mean you didn't love deeply. It means you learn to love yourself too. It means you recognize that your nervous system deserves safety. It means you decided that your emotional well-being is not something you're willing to trade just because something feels familiar. And maybe the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself is to let people hold whatever story they need to hold about you, while you quietly continue to live in alignment with who you know yourself to be. You don't have to convince everyone that you're a good person. You don't have to prove your heart to people who are committed to misunderstanding it. You don't have to stay in relationships that require you to constantly explain your worth. Protecting your peace is not about winning. It's about resting. It's about allowing yourself to live a life that feels calmer, softer, and more true to who you are becoming. And even when that choice comes with sadness, it is still a choice rooted in self-respect. As we close out today, I just want to remind you of this. Protecting your peace is not something you master overnight. It's something you practice moment by moment, choice by choice. Some days you'll catch yourself before you engage. Some days you won't. Some days you'll walk away feeling grounded. Some days you'll walk away wishing you hadn't engaged at all. All of that is part of learning. If this conversation resonated with you, I want you to know you're not alone in this. So many of us are unlearning patterns of emotional chaos and relearning what it means to live in quieter, steadier ways. If you want to go a little deeper, I have a free workbook on my website you can download. It walks you through some of these patterns in a more personal way, and you can work through it at your own pace. You can find the podcast, the blog, and more support at mommadramaandtrauma.com. And if you found something meaningful here today, I'd really appreciate it if you shared this episode with someone who might need it too. Sometimes the quiet reminders are the ones that reach people at just the right moment. You can also follow along with me on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Momma Drama and Trauma, and on YouTube where I share longer reflections and conversations around healing, growth, and learning how to come home to yourself. And if you want something a little more personal, you can find Jenny's Journey on my website, where I share more of the in-between thoughts, reflections, and pieces of my healing along the way. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for choosing to protect your peace even when it feels uncomfortable. And thank you for letting me be a small part of your healing journey. As always, you are strong, you are worthy, and your story matters. Until next time, take care of you.